If there was anything Nathan Stark hated, it was an Indian. God knew he'd killed his share of them, whenever and wherever he could, and this fine July morning would be no exception. From where he and his fellow scout and friend Cullen Jefferson hunkered down in the brush along the face of the embankment at their backs, Nathan eased the trigger of the Winchester repeater back gently, taking up the slack in it. The rifle was an old friend, carried through thick and thin for many a mile. He'd been tempted to buy a newer model, the 73, but in the end, he'd held on to the 1866 model he'd had for the past 8 years. He wasn't sorry. The repeater had stood him in good stead, and he trusted it. Cullen crouched beside him, their positioning as familiar as the breath they drew. Neither looked at the other. There was no need. Nearly 10 years of traveling and working together more often than not in their assignments with the U.S. Army had brought them as close-knit as brothers. Closer, in fact, than the kinship Nathan felt with his own flesh-and-blood brothers he'd been raised with. Though Cullen had a good 15 years on Nathan, they'd seen one another out of plenty of scrapes so far, the present one being nothing out of the ordinary. "Hear something?" Cullen whispered, his own finger ready on the trigger of his .52 caliber Spencer carbine. He was bigger, shaggier, grayer than the lean, dark-haired, wolfish Nathan Stark. "Not yet, but they're out there." Coming up through the eastern part of Indian Territory on their way to their latest assignment at Fort Randall in the Dakota Territory, they detoured to Fort Smith. It was the nearest town of any size, and they'd needed to pick up much-needed supplies to see them through the rest of their journey north. Nathan had been sent from their last post at Fort Sill. Cullen was to cool his heels with nothing to do. The Apaches and Comanches in that area had been installed on reservation lands, the hostilities having calmed considerably in the 18 months since the 2 scouts had been assigned to the Fort Sill command post. The flare-ups that occurred were nothing that couldn't be handled without them, so Cullen had saddled up and ridden north with Nathan when his friend received orders to leave Fort Sill and head to Fort Randall. Cullen had told Colonel Bixby, "Guess my orders were delayed. Nate and me are partners. Command ought to know that by now." Nathan squinted, waiting for the creek, at least he thought that was what they were, to make their appearance again. They'd be along shortly. He and Cullen hadn't had much of a lead on them. They'd spotted at least 3 of them, and there was no doubt in Nathan's mind that when he and Cullen rode out of the canyon nestled in the Sandboy Mountains of East Central Indian Territory, there'd be at least 3 less Indians in the world, no matter what tribe they hailed from. "Come on, I know you red devils is out there," Cullen muttered under his breath. "Only 3, you think?" "More, something tells me.